Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going beyond basic film criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole, and with me today is...
Garret.
And we are overanalyzing...
Wonka.
So, starring Timothée Chalamet as the young Willy Wonka as he dreams of opening a shop in a city renowned for its chocolate, and discovers that the industry is run by a cartel of greedy chocolatiers. What did I think of this movie? Since you're so sure you know.
I don't think Nicole liked this movie very much, and I think she thought the gimmicks were wonderful, and it was nice nostalgia, but it just didn't land for her.
What did you think of this movie?
I thought this was the best way to end 2023 on our podcast. A wonderfully warm, lighthearted, whimsical movie that wasn't afraid to make fun of itself, where all of the acting but one fell flat.
Okay, so I am going to say this up front. We are going to have an incredibly fun and productive conversation about this movie because here are my notes. I am basically showing Garret a blank page. You know why? I didn't want to take any notes.
It was so good. And I
was like, I loved it. I was like, I don't want to pick this apart. I don't want to overanalyze it.
Can we just literally talk about, okay.
I just didn't want, I was like, you know what? It's the last movie of the year, and I know I'm failing this podcast, but like, I don't care.
It wasn't even failing this podcast. I thought that's the reason you would hate it, is there wasn't enough to pick apart about the movie. It was pure
joy,
love, and joy. And the person I went with said, this is going to be one of my new feel-good movies. I am telling you, run, walk, float, ride a giraffe, do whatever you want to go see this movie because this is the best adaptation of Roald Dahl. Best adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Best adaptation of Willy Wonka. It was so beautifully, wonderfully comical, light. It is a pastel wonderland into pure imagination. And I actually was like, if we don't call this Wonka in pure imagination, I will be mad because it reminded me when we did Where'd You Go, Bernadette, where we talked about creativity and how like the movie actually inspired you to want to do something. This one just wanted me to sit and enjoy and not have to think, and there's no super hard plot to figure out, and it's just fun, charismatic charisma that I could not wait to talk about. And I wanted to text you after I saw it. It was like, you have to tell me how much you enjoyed that. It was a world of pure imagination. It was...
So, I will say, I'll get the one nitpick out of the way.
You have to leave that in there for the edit, though. It was, and both of us pausing, because that is the pure essence of the movie. It was so wonderfully joyful.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, I would have preferred that they picked somebody who could actually sing for the lead.
Same.
Having said that, I am not a Timothée Chalamet stan. I'm like, he's fine. I have no feelings. Really? I thought he was wonderful. I loved him in this role.
That was my, like, I was like, there was no powerhouse to carry any of the numbers. It didn't wow me in song, like, wonderful, beautiful, deep, or rich, but like...
Oh, the Three Chocolatiers, though. They could sing. They were great. Like, their numbers were terrific. Like, but yeah.
But I also thought Timothée Chalamet, like, I could take him or leave him in most things, and I will be shunned in my community for saying so. But he landed this part so well.
Absolutely.
And was not even... It was wild and quirky in its own way without being over-the-top Johnny Depp or being so happy-go-lucky, weird, creepy from Gene Wilder. It was a nice, refreshing, like, I'm kind of, my head's in the clouds, but I am a realist in that I want to just spread human contact and joy. I thought it was the perfect movie to end this year on the podcast. I'm glad you said it because I told my friend, I was like, I could not imagine a better movie just to sit and talk about how much I enjoyed for, I don't know, however long we go tonight. But, and you listeners, if you're like, oh, I'm going to turn it off, they're not critiquing it. Good, then turn it off because go see it instead. It was wonderful that way.
Yeah, so it's hard to critique, like, and I will say, because, so in preparation for this movie, I went back and saw Paddington, which I had never seen. I've always been a big Paddington fan. the bear, the books, like, we liked them a lot as kids, and we had a Paddington bear. And like watching the movie of Paddington, and I have this same feeling about Wonka as well, as like, I can't really put my finger on quite why it works. But Paul King, like, every element managed to be whimsical and amazing, and it never crosses that line into twee, right? Like, it's never Wes Anderson. It's like it goes right up to that point, but it never goes over. And without having to, like, freeze frame shot for shot, I'm like, I'm not quite sure why it works as well as it does.
And it was not camp necessarily either, which I think I really enjoyed too. Like, Wes Anderson to me is not necessarily camp, but I agree with Twee, but like, it wasn't camp. It was whimsically light, as if we were like getting one of my favorite parts of the Wonka universe, is the everlasting gobstopper that like gives you food flavors all the time. And that's what I felt like I was served in every new scene. Something delightful to taste and try and experience and just kind of be in my own nostalgia. But if you've never seen any of the other or read any of the other Wonka adaptations, it was just nice to be like, this is pleasantly wonderful and good human contact on a lot of different levels. And not overly weird villains. Like, villains were kind of just like, I'm in for the money. That's all I'm here for. Like, not like some side plot, but were also humanized in parts and ways. And it's a movie that was not afraid to make fun of itself too. And I thought that was the irony, because like, owning your own comical errors, like a man who eats so much chocolate that he becomes bigger and bigger in every scene, like, oh yeah, you are like the living, dream. But the twinkles of every adaptation of Golden Ticket, Pure Imagination, Oompa Loompa, interspersed in these numbers.
I mean, they start the movie with the Pure Imagination in the background, which is the only note I took, and then I just stopped taking notes because I didn't feel like it. And I was like, yay! Like, there's like, especially for people my age, like, we grew up watching that Gene Wilder, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And just hearing the notes of that song is going to induce, like, a delightful nostalgia.
I had goosebumps everywhere when I just, like, the four notes. Dun,
dun, dun, dun. Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts, a lot to download here. But I will say, like, first and foremost, I think something that has been really lacking, and which makes this movie so much like a just delicious warm hug, is that, like, earnestness has gone out of style. There has been like a sort of millennial trend of like, everything has to be ironic. Everything has, like, you have to take a mocking tone to everything. And this movie is just like sweet and wears its heart on its sleeve. And it's just very, very earnest all the time. And it's really nice. Like, it's okay to have emotions.
And it's okay not to have seven complex subplots within a character, right? Like, some characters are just this one beautiful note. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that it's weird that they're one note. Like, Wonka is so, you say earnest, I'm going to say vulnerably kind.
Yeah.
And it's not in a, like, naive way either. He's like, I'm going to hold my promise because that's what I said I'm going to do. And I'm going to make chocolate because that's what I like to do.
Right.
And there was no, like, oh, he shouldn't make chocolate because he should get a real job. That was never, like, the issue. It was more like, you can't make chocolate because you're too good at making chocolate.
Yeah. Well, and there was no sense of, like you said, there's like a way of walking through the world where you're like, I'm just going to be kind to people. And sometimes I'm going to get taken advantage of. And that's the price that I'm going to pay for just leading with kindness, right? Like, I'm okay with that. That's fine. Like, it isn't that like, oh, everybody's amazing and beautiful and I don't, like, everything's going to work out. Like, it was like, oh, life is going to be hard, but like, I can still approach it with a genuine love for mankind.
But not a blind Pollyanna way either.
Right,
like,
exactly.
Everything's always sunshines and roses. Like, admitting that sometimes harder decisions take a lot of thought and not giving up on your happiness. That's what I really loved. It's not giving up on your happiness. It's saying put a pause in it for now so someone else's happiness can thrive, so mine can grow even harder.
And not being afraid to ask for help. I thought, too, was like such a wonderful sentiment of the movie that he didn't have to go it alone, right? Like, he had to have his team behind him. And all of the people who worked in everybody in this movie was just so preciously chosen, and I just loved every
speaking
actor.
of the star-studded cast, like, you don't even know from the previews how star-studded this cast is. Like, if you IMDb it right now, you'll spoil some of the fun things, but, like, seeing, like, the priest, I don't want to say who it was, because I think that was my favorite. It's not really a cameo. I guess he actually has a part, like, but he was wonderfully one of my favorites because it's a role we don't typically get to see him in. It's something so like serious but nonchalant at the same time.
Well, and can we just say that is one of the absolute beauties of English actors is that they will take any role no matter how big or small. Like, they're never too famous not to do something that's literally 5 minutes of screen time. And I love that, like, because you get all these wonderful cameos. I think for me it was the guy who plays, like, the baby who throws this incredible tantrum in Ted Lasso being one of the villains. I was like, it was such a delight to see him again. Like,
seeing,
also being a villain again, which was great.
Which I also love, like, Matt from the Great British Bake Off is now here, like, being a chocolatier villain. Like, it was, like, the full circle for him to have been on Bake Off and all these supporting roles to be like, ooh, I'm a chocolatier villain now. And the story, again, we're not looking at complex thoughts here, but that's part of
it's a kid's movie.
But that's part of the beauty is, like, the non-complex plot made so much for the imagination to wander, and they got to do so many cool things that weren't unrealistic. And, it wasn't over the top, like, oh, roll my eyes, I couldn't believe that. It was more just like, that is so beautiful on how they, like, conducted themselves, and, like, flying through the sky was, being picked up by helium balloons, but, like, or, like, unbelievable things like chocolate that makes you levitate, but is actually just like a tiny, insect that makes you hover. Like, it was so lovely. And the villains, besides the chocolatiers, the Scrub, and
Scrub and Simply Joe. Like, I was like,
Olivia Colman killed that part.
Oh, they were both amazing. And you also, like, got, even in the ways that it lacked complexity as a plot, like, you still got some three-dimensionality to their characters. That, like, their little love story was really adorable, and you're like, oh, right, but they're terrible people. They've kept people enslaved. Like, this is bad. And just, like, the accountant and his wife, and, like, you had, again, and this is a lot due to the actors and how much they could bring to a small role. Like, you just had these, like, wonderfully realized people and characters that didn't feel like they were one note, like, lacked an inner monologue or whatever. Like, they just felt so real within the context of the world that was built.
And that they were enjoying themselves while acting too.
Oh, yeah.
Just seeing some of the creations he pulled off inside of, like, his mind that then turned on to, like, a result on screen.
I mean, like, his chocolate factory, when he opens up his case and it's like this like Rube Goldberg whatever thing, and you're like, who effing designed this thing? It's an absolute freaking miracle. That's what I'm saying. Like, I have no critique to it because I don't know how. I don't understand the craft well enough to know that it was completely and utterly magical and captivating and just didn't cross a line into stupid or twee.
Agreed.
It just worked.
And it was I laughed. There is a lot of adult jokes in there, but there's also just a lot of, like, pure joyful laughter. That's not joking, not making fun of anything. Just like
I laughed, I cried.
Yeah, that was so like, oh right, like, and and Hugh Grant sold his part so well. Like, what I actually believe in Oompa Loompa is probably, like, a little, like, I'm amazing because I am, like, this magical, mythical creature, but I'm also, like, realist and, like, down to earth and don't want to talk to you because, like, I am, better than you because I'm an Oompa Loompa. But the dryness of Hugh Grant with the smile and smirk, I was like...
Absolute perfection.
I was like, no one else could have played that part for this movie.
Hugh Grant is so underrated, like, so underrated. I don't think people realize genuinely what a terrific actor that man is. But yes, he was perfect. And he was, like, a little bit snarky, but, like, he was like, everybody was great. The cast was terrific. The little girl was good. Again, not too cutesy, not annoying. Noodle was terrific. Like, everybody just seemed... I'm with you. Like, the cast genuinely seemed to enjoy their roles, and that shone through in their performances.
I leaned over to my friend after about halfway through the movie. I said, this adaptation would make a beautiful Broadway musical, because it is just joyously beautiful colors mixing, and you go from this like kind of pastel palette to these vibrant Wonka colors all of a sudden, but you see more color light up in every scene. This is one of the things I really loved about the cinematography. When he is introducing chocolates, the color saturation starts to rise in everybody's clothes and their eyes and everything. It's like he's bringing the life to the people around him. And it's...
Can we talk about how badly I wanted that jacket?
How
bad, like, I love a velvet jacket to begin with, but I was like embroidered and it was like purple, and I was like, with every fiber of my being, someone make me a reproduction of this.
And the saddest moment, I wasn't sitting in the theater with you, and I told my friend this. I was like, I'm so glad I saw this with somebody, because the whole movie, Wonka is hoping to make chocolate in memory of his mother, that she will show up, who is passed on. And he actually believes, I think, that she will come and visit him. And finally he opens this chocolate he had made for him on his birthday, and on a golden ticket is written, it's not about the chocolate, it's who you share it with. And I leaned to my friend, I said, I wish I would have seen this the person I'm recording the podcast, because that was the moment I knew I wanted to come and tell you like how much I love this movie. And I'm happy to be wrong, because I thought you would be we didn't have anything to pick apart. And I was like, I don't know what to... You should see us both tearing up right now.
Well, and I saw it on my sister's birthday, right? So then it was like even more the impact of like having lost somebody and seeing his mother. But yeah, I felt so like it really got to me, and I was so overwhelmed and happy, and I was just like, this is everything I want in a movie, like in this kind of movie, right? Like I
didn't have to think. I could just sit and enjoy. And I think it's been so long since I've seen a movie where I was just like, this brought me literal joy.
Yeah.
And is it going to be the world's best movie ever? No. Is it going to win some awards? Possibly, because it is visually stunning.
Art direction and costumes had better freaking at least be nominated.
But it didn't matter for any of that, because I was sitting there, and every time he'd unveil new chocolate, I had brought some candy with me, and I offered it to my friend. I was like, every time he unveils a new chocolate, we have to have some in solidarity. But it was just the pure
And even down to
delight.
How the chocolates looked. Everything. Like the candy, the costumes, like I
will literally take anybody to see this movie again.
Yeah.
And I will be buying it when it comes out. We never get to hear I think one of my favorite parts of the whole movie is we only get to hear parts of Pure Imagination played, interluded with other songs or woven to their own numbers or just trickle notes. And then the very last number, and listeners, go see it. This is not a spoiler, because you will be anticipation waiting for it your whole time, and you're still not going to know when it's going to hit.
Yeah.
He sings Pure Imagination in its purest form, and he starts to envision his chocolate factory. And I'm sitting there and I'm crying in the theater. And I'm like, what? It's not even that like moving, but it's like he looked at the world with such awe. And especially to end this podcast where we talk about so much things, and not that we don't talk about lovely things, but they're heavy a lot of times, and they're
very heavy,
polarizing. And it was so nice to just sit and be like, what's going to be my recommendation? What's going to do? No, it was going to be, what is the one thing I would tell you about this movie? Go see it. Take your kids, take your grandparents, take your lovers, take your friends, take your dog. They will love it too. Like, all animals are welcome. But like, just see it for the nostalgia, joy, caring, happiness it brings, because you can't see Nicole and I, maybe you can hear it, but both of us are like,
we're like
tearing up.
Just talking about, because so to be slightly more analytical about the whole thing, it's like the difference between Pixar and Disney Disney is just a little cuter. It's just a little more pat. It's a little less fulsome. Like, it's a little less complex. Like, it's a little too sweet. It, like, they take that genuine emotion that Pixar does better than anybody, and then they just Mickey Mouse it. You know what I mean? Like, they just take it one step too far, where everything's just, like, a little cute. And I was like, Coco is... The animation is so beautiful, right? And it's like, again, Paul King, like, it was totally worked in Paddington too. It's like the sets, the props, like, every element is just right. And it never is too cutesy. And you're like, it just works on a fundamental level. And somehow, when you quote unquote Disneyfy things, you just make it a little bit too saccharine, a little bit too juvenile. And you don't give kids the kind of opportunity to feel real emotions, I feel like.
One of your points that you brought up when you're starting that is that, you know, I disagree because this and this and this. I think sometimes we go on this podcast, especially because we are wanting to talk about social change. But the thing I'm trying to impress upon you is what I am trying to talk about in social change right now is it's okay to feel like a kid sometimes.
100%!
And it's okay to just disengage from the social issue to make yourself feel alive, to make yourself remember the nostalgia, the wonder, the imagination. And it's not that we're not talking about social issue right now, because I actually think the irony is we're talking about one that probably we need more than most, is the idea that it's okay sometimes just to go enjoy something for its enjoying. I hate people who are always like, oh, you can't put your Christmas lights up too early, or you can't put your Halloween decorations up too early, or you can't have your pumpkin spice too early, or you can't celebrate fireworks before 4th of July. Whatever. Who cares? Let people enjoy the things that they enjoy, but also remember that you get to enjoy your moments in those special times. And this movie is going to make everyone in the family from 0 to 98 feel wonderful. And if you've seen Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or read any of the books, great. You'll get some of the Easter eggs if you've read the book. I won't spoil those because I actually think those are really nice if you've read the book, which takes about 2 hours because
it's a kid's book,
it's a children's book. But it just was nice to finally sit down at a movie and be like, also like you, no notes because I want to enjoy this, because it actually is so enjoyable and it took me out of my head into their world for 2 hours and whatever, that I actually stayed and didn't drift off and didn't want to come back and didn't want to think about anything because it was so delightfully holding.
I mean, actually, like, that is kind of my point in terms of social change, is that when we get packaged this corporate vision of sentimentality, I think it's somewhat damaging. And this movie just didn't do that for me. Like, that's what I mean. Like, I agree. Like, we have gotten so far away from, like, genuine emotion. Like, everything has to be mocking or ironic or have a cynical twist or, like, or it's, like, overly pat in one note and there's no real complexity to it. And I was like, this was a movie that just wore its heart on its sleeve and it was what it was. And in so many ways, like, that's a very old-fashioned way to make a kids movie, right? Like, I'm Gen X. I was absolutely destroyed when Atreyu lost his horse to the nothing. Like, flat out, have never gotten over the never-ending story people like. I was like, our kids' movies used to have real difficult things in them. That's the kind of children's movies world that I grew up in. And honestly, like, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is dark because Roald Dahl is dark.
Very dark.
But, like, you know, like, all those kids got kind of messed up.
Like, they were, I mean, he was his own, like, Grimm's fairy tale's own versions, right? This took us to a world where his ideas were not scary. This made it so palpable and so kind that it's a little... He is weird. Wonka is weird in this movie. The character of Wonka, he was what qualifies as, like, weird, quirky, strange, insert your word, abnormal, different, a little, I would say, lightheaded, whatever, spacey, whatever, aloof. But it doesn't matter because it was so genuinely pure.
Yeah. And it was just pure. It was so sweet. Again, sweet without being saccharine, real genuine emotion and like genuine difficulties that the characters faced. Okay, like it wasn't losing a horse to nothing, but still. And I was like, we've wandered away from that point. We've wandered into a world where kids' movies are they just don't show the real struggles that kids go through because kids have loss. Kids have difficulties. Like, not every kid is growing up in a perfect family with 2 parents and grandparents and all that stuff, right? Like, we have gotten away from, I think, a little bit of genuine emotion when it's positive emotion, right?
I actually think we shy away from negative emotion intentionally.
Well, we just make a lot of violent, horrible movies, right? I don't know.
Well, even kids' movies, like we gross over the fact that like, oh, you may be different from somebody, but it has to be so different in extremes that you're a cartoon at that point. You become like this. It's a trope.
It's not genuine.
And, I am apparently for some reason our resident children's movie expert. It's probably because I have a childlike wonder in my eyes. You didn't see me, but I winked. But no, I come to talk about these because you know how many people come up to me like I'm some sort of celebrity when I engage with people and we talk about the podcast, who are like, I really enjoyed your take on whatever children's movie. I hadn't thought about it this way. And I'm always like, oh, thank you. That was lovely. I really enjoy our conversations with Nicole. But like, sometimes I'm like, did you just enjoy the movie?
Yeah.
Did you just watch the movie to watch it? Or were you also going into it looking with a rose-colored, cynical-colored, virtue-seeking glasses, whatever you want to call them? Like, we have to have a theme. We have to have a moral story. And there is one here, but it's not overly done. It's not like so sugar-coated and unbelievable, like, oh, okay, he has to give up everything he ever loves and do nothing ever again. Like, no, it's like he finds a loophole and he wants to like still do what he loves, but take care of other people because he made the whole premise is he made a pinky promise and he'd rather not break a pinky promise, which is pure and honest because he doesn't want to lie, than he would do anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it's about having a dream and sort of sticking to your dream, but like maturing to the point where you're like, the form my dream is going to take is going to change and evolve. It may not be what I originally thought. And you're like, that's a good enough message. Like, I don't need more than that. But what I do, I want that sense of genuine emotion. And I think it's so hard to find these days. It's really hard to pull off earnest.
And it's really hard to pull off a movie that both of us can agree was not about the process. It was about just the experience. And that, I think, is going to be probably, I hope, 8 million movies more, but I'm guessing few and far between because it just captured such a childlike sense of wonder without having to regress.
Right.
I really thought about all the movies we've done, you and I together. I mean, You've done way more than me. Clearly, everybody, you've been listening. But like, I just was thinking, when's the last time both you and I just sat and said, what a lovely movie. No notes, except for go see it, have a good time, and also remember, this podcast takes itself at its own worth.
Yeah.
But never too seriously to admit that, like, we both are children too, even though we're adults, and we still have that spark inside of us. And I wish you could see, and I tell you this a lot because I like visual descriptors, but the twinkle Nicole has had while talking about this and the grin I've had on my face the entire time. And we've talked about some of our worst moments on this podcast.
Yeah, we have. It's gotten really heavy, and I guess that's what I mean. Like, I think people, for something to be worthwhile or important, people want it to be difficult or traumatic, right? Like, there's that, like, just like the bias in the Oscars,
You have
right?
to
They never
suffer
nominate
to-
comedies. They only nominate dramas. And you're like, a well-crafted comedy is as good as movie as a well-crafted drama. Like, why is this more serious or more better? It isn't. And you're like, this movie was everything you want a children's movie to be. And that has its own value and worth. And like, why is it sort of society in general, or the, like, plus the Academy, like the people who get to be arbiters, quote unquote, of taste, so dismissive of happy things? Like, why is a happy ending harder to pull off than a sad ending? It shouldn't be.
And you now have me questioning, why is this movie only for children? Why?
Oh, it's not. Please.
That's the issue though. Like, right? Like, it's billed as a children's movie because they need to be reminded of the childlike wonder and the joy, and just go see and enjoy a movie and laugh. And there's so much visual stunning for kids to see. The dialogue is very positive. It's very kind. It's very uplifting. But this is not just a children's movie. This is a movie for everyone to remember that we're all still big kids. It's okay just to enjoy things for their own enjoyment without having to pull out a greater theme.
But I think that is the point, right?
I know,
like that is the point.
That
is the deeper meaning of this movie. The deeper meaning of this movie is sometimes you just need a hug. Sometimes you just need a hug, and this movie is like a hug. It just wraps you in its like warmth and delight, and that we got so focused on all of the things that are going on. Like, I've actually really had to curate my media intake across a lot of platforms. Like, I realized I got myself into, partly because of an algorithm issue, like a negative space where I was just constantly being shopped material of like what's wrong with the world. And there's a lot wrong with the world. But like, you can't have an entire diet of like, this needs to change and I'm outraged about this. Like, there's genuinely things that you need to change and be outraged about, but like, you gotta give yourself mental space to see the good in the world, see the delight in other people. Like, and I think this movie is sort of more necessary than ever in that sense. And I think acknowledging that, like, you can't, even movies that matter, delight matters, joy matters, whimsy matters. Like, it can't just be all racism, sexism, misogyny, like the patriarchy, like, it can't just be all those things. Like, you have to have some mental space.
Movies matter for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, they really do.
And not to be punny, but and so do your emotions. I was going to say so do you, but
Yeah.
So do your emotions. And it's been a long time, I think, that we've been asked to just sit and enjoy and not consume. And we consume to feel something. Just to experience joy, to sit there. And I know this is so hard if you've not seen it. And if you have seen it, you're sitting there grinning with us. You're sitting there nodding along. You're like, no notes. And if you do have notes, great. We'd love to hear them. But like, that's not the issue. The issue is like, stop taking notes sometimes. Be in the moment and be present and be in a space that says, hey, I've set up a space that it's okay to be safe, dedicated joy right now. You can leave your worry, your struggles, your pain away for just a little bit. Suspend it just for a little bit. To take a moment to just be kind to yourself, to be kind to those you share this space with. And not that those things are going to be solved and they're not going to go away.
And there will be another episode and we will talk about some of the stuff in the world. But like, this episode is not that thing because this movie is not that thing.
But it's now become the social issue of like taking time for you, your space, your emotions, your rawness that doesn't have to be raw to feel, can be raw to experience joy, which is, I guess, feeling, but it doesn't have to be raw to experience a negative context. I think so much when we say someone's raw, they're like, at their lowest, they're vulnerable, they're exposed, Instead of raw can also mean just open and accepting to taking whatever comes with you right now. And sometimes, and often when we're not looking for it, is pure childlike wonder that knocks us off our feet in the best way possible. The person I saw it with, his critique was, I wanted more vocals. He wanted more powerhouse vocals. And I said, okay, what else? What's your other critique? He's like, no, that was it. And I was like, yeah, it's a movie where a man probably can't sing as well as we'd like him to. And he was like, but I loved it. He laughed the whole way through it. And this is a man who loves to laugh in general, but he just giggled and laughed. And he's a big 6'6" man who's built like a football player. And he was just I just enjoyed being there. And I told him after we walked out, I was like, I think that's one of the best experiences I've ever had with you. Not because it was anything special, just because we both got to laugh, cry, and have just delight.
2023, I think, has been a really difficult time. Post-COVID, but not post enough.
Post-COVID, but also the real world has continued. It's in normal, if not elevated, consistency and intensity.
Right, and I feel
people are back and things are worse somehow.
Yeah, and it's you're I just want to wear my sweats outside the house, but I still feel I need to put real pants on.
I'm in a moral dilemma here. Can the world calm down?
Yeah, I think this has been a really tough year for a lot of people that I know, myself included, and I think that we just needed this, and I think this was, yeah, absolutely the perfect way for movies that mattered in 2023.
And I literally had said the same thing. I told my friend, I was like, I couldn't imagine a better movie to end on. And, I was very busy this year. Thinking back over this year and all the episodes I've done and all the wonderful episodes everyone else has done. And when I listen, it's always nice to be totally was there with you. It was oh, no. And we disagree so wonderfully. And I say that because you and I rarely have the exact same sentiment on a movie. I think this may be our third, which is fun because we do love the analytical reason we're here. We run a podcast for that reason. But I will never not say this about this movie and how it ties into this group and every movie lover out there and the non-movie lovers too. You don't need to love every movie. You're not going to love every movie. You're not going to ever agree with all your friends. You're not going to agree with everyone else on a movie, on an analytical topic, on a social issue. But what you are going to agree on, and some of you have heard me say this to you before, especially thank you to the three of you who constantly never miss an episode of mine. I love to talk and I love a debate. What I love more is hearing other people experience a movie in a way I never did. And that is a magical part of this podcast.
For sure. Stuff has gone really bad this year on a global front, in a domestic front, and it was just a warm hug of somebody genuinely saying, everything is going to be okay. If we can still make movies like this, everything's going to be okay.
And if you think we're sounding like we're emotional about a movie, it's because
we're so emotional.
You need to be sometimes. And you need to realize that's okay too.
Right.
Because those are the movies that actually, the ones that are polarizing in both directions in every emotion are always going to continue. And
yeah, we need them, but we also need this.
I couldn't. Sometimes, listeners, don't forget that this podcast is also catharsis. And not in a therapeutic, I'm going to expose all my secrets, but we see the world as more analytical people typically in general. Facts. All six of you come disagree with me at another time. But this podcast brings a lot of things that we think about daily probably to a forefront. And we ask you to think about them deeper. You may not agree. You may not engage. Sometimes what you just need is to let go and just be entranced by the wonders of Wonka and the movie that ended this podcast in the best way possible. ended the year of this podcast in the best way possible.
Yeah. To that end, dare we even give this a social impact score?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't even know what to give it.
I have to give it minimum a 7.
Okay.
I have to give it under a 9. Not quite an 8, but not quite a 7.5. 7.75 is where Garret lands, and this is why. Don't rob yourself of joy when it's right in front of you. Don't go into this movie looking to talk about with me, your friends, your partner, yourself. I don't know who you're talking to these days. But don't go into it looking to actually want to pick it apart. The more you do, the more you've missed the assignment.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough to give this a score. Like, a 6 or a 7. Maybe that's unfair. I'm like, this movie is just, it's so well crafted. Like, it's really it's really hard to craft something to be whimsical and adorable and not cross the line into twee and saccharine. It's hard. It's very difficult. So yeah, and I want this to just be the feel-good family movie that everybody comes back to. Like the original. Like, everybody loves the Gene Wilder version for good reason. So yeah, I give it a 7 too. It was just such a delight. Recommendations?
I think I've done this on a previous podcast. It may come as a shock to you that I say the same things over and over again, but I really wish somebody would read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory aloud to another person.
Oh, interesting.
Reading aloud involves imagination that you don't even know you have. You start to lose yourself, and even if you don't do voices or characters, you don't need to, because you start to invoke their imagination. You can read in your own, but when you read to somebody else, you invoke a different kind of imagination. So read the book. It is actually quite lovely. It's not even, again, filled with a lot of parables. It's filled with a lot of whimsical, fun, jovial attitude. That's my recommendation. Read it aloud to somebody else, or have it read aloud to you and see the difference.
So I'm going to recommend, it's the end of the year, it's the holiday season, and I just listened to one of my favorite podcasts do a review of this movie, which is one of my absolute all-time favorites. And I'm recommending it because we've just done a whole podcast about sincere emotion. And that is what we have lost in the modern rom-com. No one knows how to do sincere emotion anymore. And that was why the 90s were the height of that. While You Were Sleeping, one of my all-time favorite quotable movies. Go watch. I mean, it's what put Sandra Bullock on the map for good reason. And it is a genuinely good movie about being lonely. Like, that's sort of her loneliness is the center of the movie. And I think for anyone who's felt lonely around the holidays, it will make you feel seen and hopeful at the same time. So, yeah, don't reach out to us. Don't talk to us. Don't say anything. Just go enjoy Wonka. Be in that moment. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not plugging anything. We have a website and everything.
Only leave us candy emotions.
Yeah, just love it. Just be love and joy and light at the end of the year. And this, the shortest day of the year. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
I'll see you next time.